This video details our motorhome adventure as we explore Steiermark, a lesser-known region of Austria, known in English as Styria. Having visited the spectacular Dolomites the previous year, we weren't expecting much from Steiermark, but we were truly blown away by its beauty. So join us on our adventure, which for us unfortunately begins with a very long flight from Australia to Munich, where we arranged for transport from the airport to McRent in Mark Indersdorf to pick up our motorhome. Even though we arrived early, McRent had the lovely Sunlight T69 ready and waiting for us. We've rented through McRent for over 10 years now, and they've always been great. They give you a full run through of the van and its equipment. This time we had a satellite TV, which was great. Unfortunately, we didn't have a sat-nav this time, which made my job as navigator a lot harder. Without a good data plan for our phone, I couldn't use Google Maps, so had to use a combination of Garmin Explore, which tracks our watch location, and an offline version of Maps.me. So with the motorhome now ours for 6 weeks, we did our shopping at Lidl and Aldi, then headed off to our Stellplatz in Erding, ironically close to the airport we'd arrived at only hours before. We chose to go to Erding because it suited our route and because it was reasonably priced at €17 a night. After taking a day to get over our jet lag and finish setting up the motorhome, we drove 256 km to Ramsau Beach in Austria, where we had arranged to pick up our Steiermark summer card, a bargain price at €79 per person. With the Steiermark card, we had free use of lifts and toll roads in the region, saving us around $1,000 in total. We arrived at the campsite, which is conveniently located at the base of the Rittersberg lift, and once parked, we took the gondola up to make the most of the afternoon before the weather turned bad. We enjoyed a pleasant 3K return hike to the summit, which took about an hour and gave us great views to the valley below. Running alongside the lift is a fun toboggan run, which added a lot of excitement to our afternoon. After bunkering down for a day due to heavy rain, we continued our journey to Schladming, stopping first at Silberkarkland. The gorge car park was terrible, very steep and gravelly, so not safe for the van, and it was outrageously priced at €15 for campers. So we drove back to the main road and parked for €4 at a new car park that even had toilets. The weather was improving, so we donned our wet weather gear and hiked to the start of the gorge. Entry was €4.90 and it was not covered by the card. The hike up the gorge was great as all the rain had made the river flow well. Rather than hike back down the gorge though, we took the more difficult alpine route, which was challenging at times. It took us 4 hours to hike the over 9K route back to the car. We got to Zerngas camping in the afternoon and settled in for 5 nights. We loved the fact we could use the buses for free and did not have to move the van at all in that time. Next day the rain had eased, so we caught the bus to Hauser Cabling lift. Both the bus and the lift were free, so we went up to the summit, but were totally unprepared for how windy and cold it would be up there and came straight back down. At last we woke up to a beautiful day, so we got out early enough to get the 8:22 bus from Planai to Gerbing, where we then got the Stoderzinken shuttle to take us up the toll road, which is closed to traffic in the peak season. It was free with the card, but would have been €19 per person otherwise. On the bus we passed some masochists on roller skis. Don't know how they do it. Having forgotten our hiking poles, we had to make do with some sticks for the hike up to the hut and the Klettersteig. The view of the little hut perched on the edge of the mountain was lovely, and it marked the end of the trail. From this point on, you enter the Klettersteig area, and via ferrata equipment is mandatory. There's a variety of routes offered, but this being our first Klettersteig of the trip, we opted for the easier A and AB routes. They weren't too challenging, and the little bridge was fun to cross. The hike to the summit was great, and we rewarded ourselves with lunch at the top before hiking back down to the shuttle to take us back to Schladming. Our 5k hike and climb took us about 3.5 hours. Getting the wet weather gear out again, we got the bus to Reiteralb and took the Pruneg jet up the mountain in the rain. We were greeted at the top by a lovely family of Steinbocks. We just got the Pruneg jet lift up. Terrible weather, but it's certainly worth it when you come across a beautiful little bunch of ibex. And they're so not scared. No, you're not, are you? Despite the rain, we pushed on with our 4.5k hike, imagining how good this would have been on a nice day before we took the lift back down. The next morning the weather wasn't great, but we wanted to make the most of our last day in Schladming, so we caught the bus to Dachstein, the gondola up to the glacier. Luckily we'd been to Dachstein before, because when we reached the top the visibility was zero and it was freezing. We decided to take the next lift back down and catch the bus back into town. When we got back to Schladming, we jumped straight on the lift up to Planai. The sun was finally out, so we had a nice hike around the panorama weg before we headed back to the van. Ready to leave the campsite early, we filled and emptied Betty and then went to Hofer in Schladming for supplies before driving 56k to Donnersbachwald. We had a fabulous drive through two lovely valleys and arrived at the Reisner Almbahn mid-morning. We took two lifts up to the top station where we enjoyed lunch in the sunshine before hiking down to the middle station. We took over 2.5 hours to do the short 3k hike because I kept stopping to pick blueberries and Ray had to stop to pick me out of the bushes when I fell off the side of the mountain. Back in the van mid-afternoon, we headed off to our next accommodation, which was the Stellplatz in Bad Ossi we had booked in advance. Despite being called a caravan park, it was basically an expensive Stellplatz, and parking on the asphalt with no shade made it really hot. We chose the location as it was close to tomorrow's activity and we could reserve a spot being a weekend in the peak season. It was a short but spectacular 15k drive up to the Loser Elm via a toll road, the Loser Panoramastrasse. At €20 for cars, we were granted permission to use the toll road with our motorhome for free with our Steiermark card. We were early and got a great park, but plenty of motorhomes had clearly stayed the night by paying the extra fee. We got our gear together and prepared to do our second Klettersteig of this trip. Sophie Klettersteig had a C rating and it was challenging for us as it was quite steep at times and facing south was very hot and tiring. We had to use a lot of upper body strength. We both struggled past the difficult C section. Ray even had the war wounds to prove it. We returned to the van for lunch and in the afternoon, despite being stuffed from the climb in the morning, we had a lovely hike up to the Loser Fenster, otherwise known as Window in the Rocks, before heading back to our Stellplatz for the evening. After another hot night on the asphalt, we were happy to leave and drive another spectacular 34k to the top of the Talpitz Alpenstrasse. The card didn't cover this toll road, so we paid the €18 toll plus another €16 to stay overnight. Despite having no services, we were excited about the prospect of spending the night on the mountain. We packed our backpacks and headed off on a lovely 13k hike. It was a very hot day, so we were grateful for any shade the trees provided. We took plenty of breaks to enjoy the views of Lake Steinersee, Schwarzensee and Tauplitzsee. We returned to the van ready to bunker down and spend the night on the mountain, found that we weren't alone. We enjoyed a quiet night on the mountains and woke to a beautiful day before heading back down the toll road, avoiding the cows, to Torplitz. Starting in the town, the first part of the hike was along roads and was very hot and exposed. Once we reached the forest and hiked along the Mulbach to the waterfall, it was lovely. The 7.5k hike took us around 3 hours. Leaving Torplitz, we backtracked to Pickle to stock up on supplies at Hofer. We then continued on to our campsite for the next 2 days at Puttersee. Don't normally like camping by a lake as they are always busy sites, and this one was no different. It was packed being a long weekend. Luckily we booked well in advance. Being a public holiday, we got out early and drove to Rochaclan. Free to park and entry to the gorge is €6 but free with our Steiermark card. The climb is only short but was lovely with lots of wooden stairs and thundering water and quite cool on a hot day. There are several hikes out of the gorge and we chose to hike to the Schwefelquellum and onto the ruins of Berg Bolkenstein. Our 6k hike took us about 3 hours with lots of stops along the way. When we got back to the campsite, we just chilled out by the lake and enjoyed the free Wi-Fi. We left for Steiermark the next morning at 6 a.m. and had a great run with no traffic, even through Liesen. The scenery was spectacular, especially through the Gazauser National Park. We had to arrive at Kobolvert ready for a 9 a.m. cave tour. The tour is only offered once a week and is run by the guest house. The cost is €18 per person, but was free for us with our card. Once the group was ready, we were kitted out with lights and helmets, then set off to hike the cave entrance. I think we were all unprepared for the difficulty of the alpine trail. It took about an hour to get to the Edelsteinhöhle, a huge cave in the mountain. We put on our wet weather gear and left our backpack at the entrance. The cave tour was quite a shock, very natural with lots of challenging footing on slippery wet rocks. We even had ropes at times and some stairs in some places. A real adventure. Our hiking time was around 2.5 hours for the just over 5 Ks, but on top of that we had about 2 hours in the cave. So it was a fabulous outing, but quite challenging at times. We left mid-afternoon and drove back through the Gazauser National Park. It was only 11 k to the Forstgarten campsite in the heart of the national park. Another awesome drive. They don't take reservations, so we had to make sure we got there early enough to secure a spot for the 2 nights. We didn't want to move Betty, so we hiked alongside the river almost 4 k to where we would have parked. From there we headed up the trail to Hessehütte. It was a lovely but challenging forest walk to start with, but got steeper and gravelier the higher we went. It took well over 1 hour to reach the waterfall and became more like boulder rock scrambling. We were both quite uncomfortable and were a bit scared about having to go back down, so we stopped at the waterfall and had lunch and then turned around and went back down and continued on back to the campsite. In total we hiked about 11 Ks in 5.5 hours. Yet another fabulous drive through the national park took us 25 Ks to the Stellplatz in Eisenhütte. We wanted to get there early to claim a site, but to our surprise we were the only ones there. We made the most of the free site and stayed 2 nights. It was only €1 for 8 hours of wonderful 16 amp electricity. The downside was it was super hot in the van with no shade, and being on the asphalt made it even hotter. We packed our backpacks with food and water for the day and our Via Ferrata gear with the intention of hiking up the Südwandsteig and then down the Markussteig. It was an extremely hot and sunny day and it was punishingly steep. We almost made it to the top where the Ferrata started, but we decided it was too dangerous and we were too exhausted, so we turned around and came back down, admitting defeat. It was an extremely challenging hike of almost 10 k, but with a very steep ascent of over 800 metres, most of which was out in the open with the hot sun bouncing off the white rock, an exhausting 6.5 hour ordeal with the disappointment of not making it to the Ferrata. Betty was a welcome sight when we got back to the Stellplatz. We woke to another very hot day, and having been defeated by the Pfaffenstein mountain yesterday, we decided to try again from the western side. Getting an earlier start, we made sure we filled our water bottles, then headed up the equally steep trail, but with more shade from the forest this time. Unfortunately, when we reached the open scree, we couldn't handle how slippery and dangerous it was, so we turned around again. On the way down, I fell off the side of the path into a blackberry bush. I was cut and bleeding, but the bush broke my fall. In this failed attempt, we hiked about 8 k and took about 5 hours. When we got back to the van, we found we'd made a new friend. When it cooled down in the evening, we went to explore the lovely town of Eiseners. There was a great vibe with a band playing in the square. There was also a lovely old church and museum, so we could soak up the culture. The next day we got an early start to beat the heat. It was a lovely 26k drive to Northcliffe. We'd booked a 10 a.m. tour of the Kraus Hole, which would have cost €18 per person without the card. From the car park we had quite a steep hike to the entrance of the cave, which can only be visited on a tour. You're provided with helmets and a handheld torch. There are many caves throughout the Alps and they are all quite different. This cave was great and was very easy to navigate. The tour guide stopped to provide information throughout the cave, but unfortunately it was all in German. The cave was very natural, with only lighting being from our torches. This is what it looked like when we all turned our torches off. Further into the cave there were great stalagmites and stalactites on display. After the tour we hiked up through the Northcliffe. It was yet another lovely gorge lined with wooden walkways and stairs. We could also get access to the stream to cool off in the shade. It was a short 4k hike through the gorge and took us about an hour and a half. There was a short 9k to the campsite. It's in Palfa and attached to a rafting hotel and campsite, and they were extremely busy with rafters. It's a great site with huge open fields and fabulous views. We usually prefer hard standing, but it's been so hot and dry we wanted to make the most of their fabulous field. We stayed for 2 nights and at €26 a night including electricity, it was a real bargain. When we got back from the gorge it was so hot we just chilled out. We got an early start for the 5.5k drive to Wasserlochlin. We didn't really want to move the van, but in the heat the return hike to the clam was too far and there's good free parking if you arrive early. Entry to the gorge is €10 per person without the card, but really worth the price. At the start you are presented with a great suspension bridge, which is the ideal place to watch the rafters on the Solza River below.
This is the camping, they call them, rafting expedition from the campsite we're staying at. We'll jump in first. We're on a suspension bridge. That's why this is going up and down. Yay! And again. Wow, he went right under. Then they swim over to their rafts. We're on the suspension bridge. There's Raymond taking a photo of the ones just gone. Looks like fun, but not for me.
Once you cross the suspension bridge, the trail starts up the gorge. We didn't need our hiking poles as the wooden path wasn't far. It is, however, quite a hike up all the stairs, over 900 of them. But early in the morning, we were in the shade all the way. It's a really nice hike through the gorge with lots of lovely waterfalls. Once out of the gorge, we continued on up a gravelly trail to a little hut with a great view back over the gorge. Our hike was around 6k and took us about 3 hours with lots of stops to enjoy all the beautiful views. Another early start for the drive up the Hocker Alpenstrasse. This alpine road was once a toll road but is now free to drive. We parked at the lift station for €5 and packed our Via Ferrata gear to do the Bergmandel Klettersteig. It's designed for beginners to test their abilities with 3 different sections. It was mostly A or B, but there were some BC sections. We hiked from the car park to the start of the Klettersteig. It was a really fun climb broken up into 3 sections, with a short hike between each one. The last section was the most challenging but very rewarding.
We're on the last Via Ferrata, almost at the top. Bit of a tricky spot here.
More than a bit.
Yeah.
It's more like climbing.
Yeah. We got Black Betty parked over there.
Oh, that was a challenge, that bit.
Yeah. Well, that's what we like, isn't it?
Well, yeah, after the challenge, not in the middle of it.
Oh well, nearly there.
It took us around 2.5 hours for the 4k hike and climb combined. After the Klettersteig, we were heading off to Lunds am See, but on the way we stumbled onto the best stellplatz we've ever stayed at. It was very new, so I hadn't researched what was around it to do, so we only stayed one night. It had the most magnificent kitchen with an oven, microwave, pots and pans, cutlery, etc., and all at no extra cost. The showers and toilets, great too. The best €25 we spent on the whole trip. All the heat from the last week had been building up and we could see very dark clouds forming, which resulted in a huge storm. We had a full day of hiking planned, so we crossed our fingers and hoped that the rain would clear as we drove the 60k to the station at Wienerbrook. To commence our hike, we had to get the Maria Zella Bahn at Wienerbrook and get off one stop later at Klaus. It's not a scheduled stop for the train, so you actually have to press a button at the station, and for it to stop at Klaus you have to press a button there as well before you get off. Luckily for us, the rain cleared and we enjoyed a wonderfully varied hike. From the station it was an easy gravel fire road to start, then a pleasant shaded forest trail where we stopped to admire an operational water wheel. From there we continued on to a hutter with a great view over the gorge. After crossing the bridge we continued on the trail, and the hike was always beside the river on lovely wooden walkways and bridges. The last part of the trail takes you back up through little tunnels and steps back to the Wienerbrook station. This magnificent 13k hike took us just under 5 hours. When we got back to the van, we continued on 7k's to a farm stellplatz close to Mitterbach. The farm was elevated above the road, so we had great uninterrupted views of the valley, and for €12 a night, including electricity, it was good value. We did not have access to showers or toilets, but the half-dozen fresh eggs were a bonus. We also had great internet, you can see why. We enjoyed a quiet night on the farm and drove the 10k into Mariazell. We made sure we were early as parking is difficult in town. We ended up being allowed to park at the SoCar service station for €6 for the day. We walked through the town to get the lift up to Burger Elf, which has lots of activities for kids, but not much for us to do, so we just walked around the adventure park for a while, then got the lift back down. Whilst in town, we went to the Mariazell Honey Lebkuchen to watch the honey gingerbreads being made. It's possible to join a tour of the bakery at certain times, but we were outside of these times, so just did a self-tour where you walk along and overlook the process. On the way out, you can buy gift packs as souvenirs from their shop. On our way back to the farm, we detoured and stopped to get the lift up the Gemeinde Alp.
Here we go up from the middle station to the top,
On the Gemeinde Alp.
and you can hear the cowbells in the distance. There they are,
Not too far.
and to the left.
What about the cow that woke us up this morning?
Yeah, big moo.
It was an easy hike up to the summit cross where we took some time to take in the beautiful views and could even see right across to the Erlauf Sea below. On yet another hot and sunny day, we left the farm and drove through Mariazell and on to Wegscheid with the intention of climbing Oliver's Mariazellersteig before then continuing on to the Stellplatz at Neuburg and the Meuse. It was a steep 1-hour hike up to the start of the Klettersteig. We paused at the info point and rehydrated and re-evaluated the climb. With the sun bouncing off the white south-facing wall, we decided it was far too hot to attempt the climb and returned to the van. We then drove onto our Stellplatz at Neuburg and the Meuse. Stellplatz was good value at €12 for the night, including water and electricity, and despite being on hard standing, we were able to get shade and it was quite comfortable. We left early for the short and scenic drive up the Preuninger High Pass to the car park. Despite being early, there were already a lot of cars parked there, but we managed to get a spot and paid the €4 fee for the day. We packed our Ferrata sets and headed off to climb up to the Reichstallersteig and then down Gretchensteig. Neither of the steigs were particularly difficult, being A, B and A. However, the hike up to the commencement of the Ferrata was very steep and rugged and quite challenging. There was also a very narrow alpine hike from one of the steigs to the next one, with a plateau at the top where we took time to have some lunch before we commenced the climb and hike back down. The 9k hike and climb took about 7 hours, and whilst challenging, it was very satisfying achieving what we set out to do. We are realising that whilst the Ferratas may be easy, the alpine hikes there and back are not. Whilst we don't normally like backtracking, we did decide to go back 10 k's to Capellen to stay at the Stellplatz overnight. Stellplatz was very similar to the one at Neuburg and the Meuse, €12 for the night including electricity and water, but this one was quite a small and busy site. Getting yet another early start, we headed back through the same Preuninger High Pass that we drove yesterday on our way to the Waitaklam car park. Car park was free but was very crowded, and there was even a bus there, making it harder to find a spot, but we did get one. It was a really fun hike up the narrow Waitaklam. There were signs saying we had to wear helmets, so we took ours, but no one else seemed to bother. There was lots of rock scrambling, and the best part was when the gorge really narrowed and we had to use ladders and chains to assist with the climb. We took the Fred Mayer Weg back down to the van. It was a nice stroll through the forest. We really enjoyed the almost 10k, 4.5 hour hike through the gorge. There are signs everywhere saying you can't park overnight, but we did get permission as long as we ate or drank something at the house. The 40k drive through the forest to Muggendorf was fabulous. The roads were good and the scenery was great. We parked at P2 at Mirrorfall with only a short walk to the entry point for the falls. Entry was €5 per person and not covered by a card. The gorge walk was pleasant but not spectacular by Austrian standards. The wooden bridges and walkways were lovely, but the falls were pretty average due to the lack of rain on the long hot summer. When we reached the end of the gorge, we extended the hike by several kilometres and headed for Steiermark. We had intended to do the Rudolf Deckersteig, but the lack of maintenance was too risky, so we walked up the clam and only did the top section of the Frater. This part was fun with wooden ladders and chains through tunnels. We did think that at €7 per person it was overpriced, and the lack of maintenance really did make some parts dangerous. We continued our hike back to the car park, and the about 9k hike took approximately 4 hours. We drove back a few k's to a campsite in Pernitz, reasonably priced at €24 per night, including electricity. Whilst we don't like big cities, we thought that being this close to Vienna, we shouldn't miss it, so we caught the train from Pernitz into the city. We had to change at Wiener Neustadt and get the Jet Express. We went 160 k's an hour into Vienna. From Meidling Bahnhof, we got the U6, then the U4 to Schönbrunn Palace. We also caught trams to other magnificent buildings, but when they all started to look the same, we caught the train back to Pernitz. After stopping at Hofer in Pernitz, we drove 27k to the Herwand National Park. The road up to the car park at the top was good but very narrow, steep and winding, and you just had to hope that nothing else came your way. Stellplatz at the top car park was good value at €15 per night, and there's a toilet and shower reserved for campers. Herwand is a huge limestone plateau, 8 kilometres long and 2.5k wide, and it towers over the surrounding flat agricultural land. We hiked to the skywalk that extends 8 metres out from the cliff face for a great view over the landscape. We also climbed the 18-metre observation tower for a 360-degree view. The weather had turned cold and windy, and at elevation the wind was even stronger in exposed areas. Our 11.5k hike luckily took us through forest, which protected us from the wind for most of the 4.5 hours we were hiking. Rundeweg number 3 took us on a 4.5 hour loop around the opposite side of the park to the one we did yesterday. It was a varied 10k hike with one challenging section up and down a ravine, some easy level sections as well, and a chance to see the animals. We headed back down the steep, narrow road out of the national park and was glad to make it out without any vehicles coming up the other way. We stopped at Hofer in Newkirchen to get supplies, then headed to the Hirschenkogelbahn at the summit of the Semmering Pass. We found a spot in their car park, and after lunch we took the lift up to discover an adventure playground waiting for us at the top.
There's so much happening up here.
Look at that.
What's that?
There's the motorway,
Oh yeah.
the road, and where's the train? I can't see the train.
There's the motorway. We didn't take it. And tomorrow there's a motorway sneaking. The
Oh,
train.
there's the railway.
Okay, I'll pan across to the railway. Yep, you just see the viaduct, and that's where we're hiking tomorrow. That's the station. We're parked overnight for 2 nights down in a car park for this chairlift. There's a, not BMX, what do we call it, Rob? Mountain bike track going down. And behind us there's the most amazing seal garden, climbing rope, scary shit.
They're walking down, that's why they got sticks.
Yeah, well, a lot of people walk up. Really great climbing rope park or seal garden as they call it. And we can do it for nothing, but we're both too chicken to try.
We climbed up what we thought was just an observation tower for a great view, but then we found out it's also used for the Millennium Jump.
If you think climbing on wobbly ropes isn't scary enough, you can try this.
We had a big day planned for the next day, so we stayed for free overnight in the car park, but so did a lot of other vans, which made for a very noisy Friday night. We were excited to do the spectacular hike alongside the Semmeringbahn route. We caught the train from Semmering up to Breitenstein to commence the hike. Semmering Railway is 160 years old and the world's first mountain railway completed in 1854. The hike is as magnificent as the railway and crisscrosses the railway line as it goes over viaducts and through tunnels. You also get to learn and appreciate the history of this UNESCO World Heritage Site along the way. This unique and amazing hike was about 12k and took us around 5 hours. We got back to the van mid-afternoon and had intended to stay another night, but being a weekend, the car park filled with revellers and we decided we would move on to a campsite closer to our planned activities for the next day. Camping Roskogler was in a convenient location, and when we rang they said they had a vacancy for us. It was basic but okay, if not expensive, at €32 a night. We woke to light rain and heavy fog, so we were in no hurry to head off to drive the 10k to the lift at Alfens. We waited out the weather in the lift car park, and after an early lunch we caught the lift up in the fog. Luckily the clouds broke and we ended up with nice views of the valley below. After a hike to the skywalk, we headed back down in the sunshine. It was about a 40k drive to the car park at Grünesee. There was plenty of parking and the fee was €6 for the day. We hiked up to Marion Clam. The hike was average, but the clam, while short, was nice. We then hiked across to Grünesee, which was okay, but we preferred the little lake next to it. The 10k hike took us around 3.5 hours. Once we got back to the van, we had to decide where to spend the night. There's a lack of options in this area, so we chose to take a diversion to a free stellplatz in Bordenberg. It wasn't great, but we had access to electricity for €1 for 8 hours, and whilst right on the main road, it wasn't too noisy. It was an easy 26k drive to Mortoon. We had an early start, so we stopped at Hofer before continuing on to the animal park. It was a large free car park, so it was good parking for the van. Der Wildberg is an animal park set out on the side of the mountain with a lift that takes you up to the top, where you get off and then walk back to the middle station through the exhibits. There was a lot for kids to see and do, but not very entertaining for us, except for the bear feeding, which we watched, but we soon headed back down to the van. We had intended to spend the day at the animal park and stay the night in the car park. We got back early and decided to move on. We drove over 100k to a campsite in Morale. The drive was fabulous with lots of twists and turns and great scenery. We really liked this campsite, and whilst not cheap at €35 a night, the services were great and it was only 5k from the Kreisberg lift. We took the lift up the Kreisberg and were keen for a long hike, however the hiking wasn't what we hoped for. It was very exposed, open and steep. The highlight for us was picking lots of blueberries and raspberries. We only hiked about 7k in total in the 3.5 hours we were on the mountain. The drive to the Grosseck barn was over 40k with a stop in Tamsweg to shop at Hofer. Didn't go into the lovely town of Matorndu, as we've stayed there before on a previous holiday when we made the most of the Lungau card in 2017. We took the Grosseck barn up again, but didn't really like the look of the hiking, so we just hiked to the Sonnenbarn and picked more raspberries and blueberries, then got the lift back down. We forgot to turn on our GPS on the watch, so the map shows a 3k hike back from the Sonnenbarn, which took an hour and a half, so we actually did double that. When we got back to the van, I rang ahead to the stellplatz in Steiermark, but they were full, so we had to change plans and drove to a campsite in Randstad instead. Moralen camp seemed more set up for caravans than campers, but they did find a space for us. We decided to stay 2 nights. We asked the reception about a good hike and they directed us to the trail to a magnificent viewpoint at Rossbrand. We first went to the Burger Elm, then up to the Radstatter Hütte at Rossbrand. After admiring the view, we hiked back down to the town and hiked the Kaiser's Promenade. The town itself was lovely, quite a hidden gem. The photos unfortunately do not do justice to the 17k, 7.5 hour hike. It was one of the best of the trip and the views were spectacular. We got a really early start for the 30k drive to Liechtenstein Clam. There's quite a lot of parking, but the gorge is extremely popular, so we had to be early. There's a boom gate that opens at 8 am to allow access to P1 and P2, but the clam doesn't open until 9. We were first through, so we got to enjoy the clam without the crowds. At €12 it may seem expensive, but it is spectacular and worth it. After the accident in 2017 that closed the clam for over 3 years, they've built 3 tunnels, 4 galleries and over 60 rockfall nets. The wooden walkway gives way to over 440 stairs and the centrepiece, which is the jaw-dropping helix spiral staircase. Truly a highlight of the clam walk. As you walk down, the twists and turns offer amazing views of the gorge. And whilst going down is fun, remember you have to climb up them on the way back. The last part of the trail takes you to a lovely waterfall where you can sit and pause to take it all in before returning back through the gorge. The gorge in total is about 4k long and you can explore approximately 1.5k on the trail. This took us a bit over an hour. After battling against the crowds of people arriving, we got back to the van mid-morning. We avoided the motorway and enjoyed the drive, especially through Werfen, as the view of Hohenwerfen is always great to see. We continued on to the Aqua Solza Stellplatz at Golling, which we've stayed at a few times before. Thought being a Saturday night it was our safest bet and we only stayed one night with an early start the next morning. Once again avoiding the motorway, we drove over 30k to the Jennerbahn car park. Whilst the car park is huge, so is the popularity of Königssee. We did manage to find a spot tucked away at the back of the car park and paid our €8 for the day. Got the very expensive Jennerbahn up for €38 per person. We almost backed out, but we were glad we didn't. It was actually worth the cost. We were keen to do the Schützensteig B-rated ferrata as it would be the last ferrata of the trip. We really enjoyed it, being in the shade most of the time on such a hot sunny day, and found the climb to be fun, including the little bridge.
Oh, here she comes. Across the bridge. Been a pretty good bit of ferrata so far. Challenging, but what we like.
After the bridge, we climbed up to the summit for a fabulous view. Before getting the lift back down, we hiked to the Jenner summit to the classic view over the Königssee. When we got back to the van, we decided to drive to a Stellplatz as close as we could for the next day's activity. So we drove 70k to a Stellplatz in Rietenwinkel. Stellplatz was very basic with no services and we paid €20, including our electricity usage. We wanted one final hike before returning to Munich, so we stopped at Kogelstein and paid €5 to park while we hiked the Schmugglerweg, the historic trail that crosses between the Tyrol and Bavaria and traverses the Interlaken, 2 suspension bridges. We really enjoyed the 11k hike, which took us about 4 hours to complete. In the van for the over 100k drive back to Munich. It was a very stressful drive as the van broke down in heavy traffic in Bad Endorf and we had to get the police to direct traffic. We eventually got going and got to Erding-Stellplatz just as it was getting dark. Spent the next day cleaning and packing, ready to take the van back to McRent and fly back to Australia. So how much did our 6-week motorhome holiday in Austria cost? The biggest cost by far was accommodation, which came to over €1,200. Motorhoming in Austria is certainly not as cheap as in Germany. There's not as many Stellplatz or free camping, but it's certainly not as expensive as, say, Switzerland. Over the 6 weeks, we drove 1,788 kilometres, so the next biggest expense would have been on fuel. So our spend there was just over €300. Our other transport costs, we did get a few trains and we did get a taxi from the airport to pick up the motorhome. One of the things we love about Austria is their use of summer or guest cards, and this itinerary was designed exclusively around the Steiermark card. Whilst we initially had to purchase the card at €79 per person, the actual net saving per person was a whopping €269 each. We also got a guest card free with our accommodation in Schladming, and that also saved us another €97 per person. And as good as the guest cards are, they didn't cover everything that we wanted to do, so we ended up paying another €190 for lifts, parking, toll roads, gorges, that sort of thing. There are, of course, other costs that I won't go into because they're pretty much specific to us. We had airfares from Australia, 6 weeks of motorhome rental, and our food and shopping because we don't eat out. We actually consider that a saving with the motorhome. So that was our 7th visit to Austria, and we just fall in love with it more and more each time. So we have 2 trips planned for 2024. And Austria will feature largely in those again. Hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was long, but we had a lot to cover. So here's to 2024.